now we're back to the doubleheader, part 2. Bruce Press is going to be talking to us about an introduction to frequency separation. This is a great topic to learn and to do if you are retouching, and there's other applications for it as well, and hopefully Bruce will touch upon that. But I give you guys Bruce Press and an introduction to frequency separation. Take it away, Bruce.
Cool. Give me a second. Let me share my screen out here. That should work. Okay. Does that work? Everybody see my screen?
Looks good. Yep.
Hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
Yep. Okay. So, hi, my name is Bruce Press. I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to frequency separation. I've kind of geared this introduction to those people who maybe have watched videos on it and maybe they moved too fast. They didn't grasp what the concepts were. So what I'm going to try and do is make sure you're brought along with the knowledge you need for each of the steps as we go. And so I'll introduce you to the concepts. I will show you how to install the actions and how to make use of them on a couple of different images. And then maybe we can talk a little bit more about other things you might be able to do with it and how people in the group use frequency separation. Let's see, give me a sec. All right. So why is it called frequency separation? That sounds really complicated. Because what you're doing is you are separating out information by the frequency. Now, I will explain what frequency means in this concept. So what you're doing is you're taking information that changes over a larger number of pixels in this case, and separating it out into its own layer. So that would be color or tone information. And then information that changes more rapidly, which kind of like with sharp edges, that we call texture. And so what you'll end up with is a texture layer that does not have color information and a color tone layer that has all of the color information, which is basically the texture blurred out. And by doing this, it allows you to effectively modify the color and tone without hurting the texture, and vice versa, be able to change the texture without modifying the color or tone. So that's the basic idea of what we're doing here. That's why it's called frequency separation, because you're separating into multiple layers. So why would you want to use it? Like I said, because you can deal with color and tone, I'm going to use them interchangeably because really they are. Tone is just a sort of like a reduced way of looking at color by itself. So if you're talking about shading, if you're talking about blotch, in the case of skin, blotchiness and stuff like that, you're able to work with those things and maybe take care of some of that blotchiness or changes in color or shading that you want to work with without affecting the texture. In the case of skin, which is where most people use it, that's pores and the edges of the nose and mustaches and whatever else, and eyelashes, things like that. So you're able to modify just one aspect of it without affecting the other, and then switching over and you can do the other side. So you can work on texture, which in the case of skin could very well be pores or the rough skin you get when you have some overexposed or greasy skin. You have very, very rough texture. So you're able to work with that texture, but maybe keep some of the specularity so that it looks legitimate and doesn't look all flattened out and plastic. Okay. And there is use for it in landscape images, and I have a link to a video on that. I don't think I'm really going to touch on that too much. Okay. Is frequency separation difficult? My assumption is that some of you, because I've heard people talk about it, have watched videos or tried it and couldn't quite grasp it. So, the concepts, we're going to go through that first. Okay. So you can kind of have an idea of even more what we're talking about here and how it comes into play. Some people think that it's hard to do because it requires math and you have to use apply image, which is something that almost none of us use in Photoshop. That's okay. There are actions to do that and you don't need to do any of the math. And how do you do anything useful with it? So you've got this color information in one layer, you've got texture information in another. We'll go through some examples and give you an idea of how to get started on it. So the information in an image is really just variations of color, right? All we have for a digital image are pixels, right? We have to express color, texture, three-dimensionality, all of that within a grid of pixels that can achieve certain colors. And that's all we have. And that's really all we're dealing with here. So what happens with these things that allow us to have the concept of texture or have the concept of color changes in depth? And that is how quickly or how much there's a change in information from one pixel to the next, and whether that happens gradually or whether it happens abruptly. Does anybody have any questions to this point?
Yes, there's a question. Michael Perciarelli is asking, are the three dimensions red, green, and blue?
No, the three dimensions are not red, green, and blue. The three dimensions are length, width, and depth. But we obviously can't perceive those things on a, we perceive them in a two-dimensional image by shadow, by blur, by color, so that we can see that things change as they move around, right? So there's going to be a shadow, hopefully on this side of my nose, and not one over here, so that my nose looks three-dimensional because there's a shadow. We're used to seeing the sun cast light onto things and create shadows, so we perceive three dimensions. So red, green, and blue are not dimensions. Those are the base colors that we use to make up the other colors. So hopefully that explains that. At least it disabuses the idea that those three dimensions are RGB. So here's an example. So if I look at the side of a cylinder, and so you're looking at that, and I'm gesturing with my hand because I'm an idiot. So let me throw a pointer on here. Okay, so if you're looking at this square here, and you see that the light is hot at the top, and as it comes down, it goes to shadow coming along the side, you can see that changes very slowly. And so we refer to that as a slow change, and that is what you would expect to see with a cylinder. So if the end, on the end, it looked like a circle, and on the side, it still looks like a square, you're going to get a gradual change in light. It's not going to be sharp. Whereas over here on the right, if you have a fast change where you go from bright to dark, you expect that to have sharp edges, right? So you have a very quick change as you move from the lit part to the shaded part. So that's what I mean when I say slow change and fast change. Okay, so that slow change is a low frequency. That fast change is a high frequency because it changes from light to dark very quickly. Cool? We good? Oops. So if you looked at this, this is a layer of something. We don't really know what it is, but this is the color information. This is the color and tone information of something. I'm not going to give it away, but this is what that layer looks like. And you could see that, sure, there's apparently in the upper left, maybe that's where the light's coming from because it's very dark over here. Doesn't really explain what's going on underneath here. But this is basically an image without texture. So you could see where maybe you could soften some of these edges and bring some of those lighter colors into the shadows and bring up the shadows. So you can kind of see that there's light and shadow, and that's and some color. It's sort of brownish, right? And this is what the texture information looks like. If you notice, it has a little bit of the light to dark in it, but primarily what we see is something that's mostly gray and just has all the texture information. And the texture is going to tell you a greater part of the story. This is a thatched roof, and so it has some real texture to it. And when you put the two of them together, you get the actual picture. Does that make sense to everyone? Does anybody need me to go into that a little more? I'll count on Danny to interrupt me if I need to. So here it is in a more typical example. This is the sort of normal sine waves for high frequency. And this kind of gives you the idea that as you go from like, let's say you're looking at a pore, and down here it's very dark because you're in the depth of a pore, but then you come up to the skin and it's much in pore to skin. You're going to see lots of these changes. So that's a high frequency texture. And that's what this looks like, right? So this is this young lady. Actually, she's a doctor. I think it's probably rude to call her a young lady. This is Dr. Seychelles' texture map. If you notice, it's all gray. There's no color information. But it has all the texture for her eyelashes and some roughness in her skin and her teeth and her hair. And then low frequency. So as you move from, dark to light, or as you move from like this area here, which is a little darker from here. So that change happens over, quite a few pixels versus this little bit of texture in her skin. The changes happen very quickly. So again, this is what we mean by texture. How quickly are we changing tone? Whether it's very fast, like in the case of like her hair. And if you notice, we've blurred out those changes so that the changes happen very slowly in the color layer for her hair. All right, so there are lots and lots and lots of actions out there to create your layers. Some of the links I have towards the end for other references on this will have other actions in order to create those layers. Basically, they're all the same. The FX ray retouching actions have a few other niceties in them. If you use the Photoshop CC version, it detects whether it's a 16-bit or 8-bit image, which is important because of math that we don't want to have to worry about. And it also has like check layers for finding blemishes and things like that. So, solarization and high contrast and black and white layers that can be generated for your image so that it makes it easier to find those things that maybe you want to fix. This is where it can be found, fxray.com tutorials/fs. This is a QR code. So if you want to just grab it with your camera, what I'll do is when I post the video up to YouTube, I'll also put all these links in the description. So this just outlines the automatic detection and all the other things that I just said. So reinforcing it with a slide. So this is what we're going to do from here on. I'm not going to like bore you with more slides. I'm going to go ahead and install the FX ray frequency separation into Photoshop. I'm going to run the action on an image, demonstrate how you might use it to retouch a headshot, some of the techniques that you would use, demonstrate how to remove wrinkles from clothes because doctors' white coats are crappy and end up all covered in wrinkles. Some Q&A and some references, some other things for you to explore. I don't expect to make you experts in frequency separation by the time we're done, but hopefully I will give you some basis for being able to take the next step and use it if you're not already a user. All right. So here I've downloaded the FX ray frequency separation actions. Is a .zip file that comes down, and I've expanded it here. And there's two action files. One is for Photoshop CC and one is for Photoshop CS6 or whatever you might have. Hopefully you're running CC because there's really no excuse for not doing that. You're going to miss out on a lot of things. You're not getting the latest and greatest if you're not. Let's see. So there we go. Dr. Zach. Okay. So if you haven't done actions in Photoshop, actions are little programs. They're macros. If you open up an action, I'll pick something simple. Basically, it's a bunch of steps, right? So let me pick a better one, a better example. So this one, you're going to make an adjustment layer, set it to current, select the RGB channel. So you go through and you're going to create a bunch of things by running this little program. So this little program that I wrote just creates dodge burn layers, which you can see over here on the right. So there's a dodge layer and a burn layer. We're not using those right now. That's not what we're about, but that's basically how they work. If you go up here to the upper right where the hamburger menu is, and click on that, one of the things that you will see in here is load action right here. We're going to load an action. So we're going to go ahead and load that CC version of the FX Ray Retouch. Load it in. Done. And so here are our frequency separation options. Simple just creates 2 layers. Advanced will include things like that black and white check layer and stuff like that. So looking at this guy, we'll just look at the doctor really quickly. I'll zoom in. Okay. So good looking young man, obviously smart because he's a doctor, damn it. But, you know, certainly some things that he would expect a decent photographer to take care of on his image. Some of the blotchiness on his nose, maybe some of this redness, that would probably be taken care of in a different way. But, you know, those are definitely things we would take care of, and some of this stuff on his face. And then coming down here and, you know, maybe we'd be able to take care of this stuff as well. And certainly the stuff that looks like he slept in his white coat. Oops. So those are the things we would probably want to be taken care of. And if I was smart, I would have done that on its own layer, but I didn't. Okay, so if you look up here, is that magnifying glass? Where is it? There. So if you look at the file, Photoshop's going to tell you if it's an 8-bit or 16-bit image. Okay, I think the ones we're all dealing with are 8-bit images. So if you are using an action that is specific to 8 or 16 bits, like some of these are, right? Frequency separation, 16-bit, frequency separation, 8-bit. Here, 8-bit, 16-bit, you would choose the appropriate one, okay? They behave in exactly the same way. There's a little bit of math that's different, but that's it. At running the actions, you will not notice the difference. And for those of you who have never seen this, one of the things you can do is there's something called button mode. And when you take your actions and put them in button mode, then you end up with a panel of just buttons you can click on. So if you haven't used actions before, the way you work them, if you're running an action, is clicking on the action and then hitting play down here, and that executes the action. If you're in button mode, you can just find them. I didn't color code these, but there's frequency separation 8-bit there, and you can just click on the button. I go back and forth. We're going to say do the 8-bit right here. So what's going to happen is the only action you need to take in the process of creating the layers is to determine the amount of blur that determines the difference between the color layer and the texture layer. And so what we'll start this, and then we'll talk about it a little bit as we go along. So it's going to create an action. This is a Gaussian blur. This is going to be the difference between the color layer and the texture layer. Now, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, you may do this differently, right? You may choose a different value. If I choose too low a value, then what you're going to see is texture things or things that you might want to consider texture, like these blemishes in the color layer. You use this. So if you go too low, you'll actually see, if you look in this little box here, you'll see we have texture in that box. We want to make sure that that's gone. So what you decide is texture is going to be different depending on the image, depending on the focal length of your lens, depending on the resolution. It's going to vary greatly. Now for these images, since I just got done doing about 50, 60 of them, I've been running about 4.5. I might go a little farther on this because he has particularly, kind of rough skin. So I might just go to 5 on this to determine like the difference between shadow and light, color and texture. Okay. Now, if all you were doing was dealing with these large blemishes, then you might choose a higher number to the point where those were really blurred out and you would just be able to work with them on the color layer. I don't mind being able to move back and forth between the two layers as necessary. So we're gonna do that. And as you can see, we have our original image back, okay? So we have this low frequency layer. If that's our only layer. Hang on, let's do this. So there's our low frequency layer. And as you can see, it's quite blurred out. That's what the Gaussian blur did to us. It took the features and blurred them, okay? So that we're not dealing with the sort of more fine texture and fine details. And then there's the texture layer. If you notice, pretty much all the color information is gone and all we have left is the texture. And in fact, you can see the texture probably even better now when you take that away, right? So you can see that. And then, so what that texture layer is doing, it's actually creating sharpening on top of the blurring for the low frequency layer. So they're basically balanced out so that, you have the low frequency layer, the color layer creating blur, and then the high frequency layer creating texture on top of that so that you end up with your original picture back. Everybody kind of with me conceptually at this point? Any questions?
No questions, but a lot of comments about that button mode. We like the button mode.
Okay, so there are a number of ways. Generally what you want to do is you want to work with the low frequency layer first.
Hey, Bruce?
Yeah.
I stand corrected. There's one question. Would
Sure.
you blur your layer value depending on whether it's a male or a female?
That's a great question. Possibly, but not specifically, right? I mean, it's like any retouching. There is a subjective aspect to it. So it really depends on how smooth you plan on making the skin. It depends on what the skin looks like. And it depends on how you as a retoucher like your final product to look. If you push really hard and push a lot of texture into the color layer, then what you're going to do is you're going to really blur a lot of that texture. So you're going to start losing some detail in the skin. You may be cool with that. That isn't generally my preference. So my preference is to keep as much texture as I possibly can while making the subject look better. So I don't do it on a gender basis, although, we are, we do have sort of a sexist view of it where we think it's okay for guys to have sort of a more rough, rugged, skin texture, beards and stuff like that. And for women, we tend to not like that. And our clients tend to not like that. So, it's like any retouching. There's a certain aspect of it that is subjective and is based on taste and your clients. Hopefully that answers the question.
Awesome.
Okay, so there are 3 different ways I use to deal with like blotchiness in the skin. So and I know there are other people like Gary Hughes put a video out in the last couple of weeks that I link in at the end of this, where he uses a very different technique, still using frequency separation, but using different tools a lot more with the clone stamp and the patch tool. And I generally don't use the patch tool when I'm doing this. So what I'll do is I'll use the lasso tool. I'll create a feather, which is generally 8 to 12 pixels. Generally 8 is enough. And what that's doing is that is just kind of keeping your edges of your selection kind of soft, right? So that you're not getting hard edges on your selection and creating areas of, you know, weirdness along the line of your selection. So here's one, let's see. So we're going to create a relatively large area here. And one of the things I'm doing is I'm going to deal with this blotchiness here, and I'm going to start dealing with this kind of overexposed, greasy area on this forehead. So there's two ways. When I originally learned to do this, I was kind of taught to use a Gaussian blur. And so you can see as I move the blur up, and you can see it as I turn it off and turn it back on again, I'm getting sort of more uniformity of color. And the reason you do low, and obviously I don't want to make it perfectly smooth or anything. I mean, I could lose my mind and everything goes gray if I go too far. There you go, start saying gray around the edges. I want them to look real when I'm done. So I generally don't go too far. Maybe somewhere in here. And what that's doing is it's blurring, right? So where you have different colors, it's going to blur the difference between those colors, right? It's going to just start taking that sine wave and smoothing it out. And so you can kind of preview off and on. And you'll notice that some of that color is going to take out some of that texture, right? So some of the stuff we didn't like some of that roughness is already being taken care of. And that's why you want to do low frequency first, because you may take care of some of the things that are bothering you without having to go in and edit actual texture on the forehead. So that's one way. I now feel like Gaussian blur is a little bit ham-fisted for this. So what I've been doing more recently is using motion blur. Oops, hang on. And the reason I use motion blur is because I can determine the direction of the blurring, and that's why it's important. So if I'm just trying to keep, like if I don't want to lose some three-dimensionality here, like obviously the brightness of his forehead, the middle of his forehead is going to come closer to me, and we're going to come off to shadow as we go to the side. So if I take and set my my line horizontally and I start stretching that out, you may find that it's kind of flattening out his forehead. It's taking away that dimensionality. So I may not want to do that. That might be exactly what I don't want to do. And so by using motion blur, I can turn it vertical if that's appropriate and keep that dimensionality. It becomes much more obvious when you do something like the nose. So if I come in here and I do it horizontally, you're gonna see his nose look kind of fat and wide. May not be your first choice, right? So by turning it vertical, now we're keeping that dimensionality in his nose, but we're still allowing it to take care of some of the blotchiness along the nose. That's probably a little bit more than I would do anyway, but you can see that it's just basically taking care of some of the discoloration in his nose without basically changing the shape of his nose. So that's two ways, motion blur and Gaussian blur using a lasso. The other way, again, you know, Chris Paulus and Danny and everybody, we love that mixer brush. So remember, we're dealing on a layer that is just color. And so we can take the mixer brush and we can start blending these colors into each other. So let's say if I think that this part's too hot because it's you know, greasy or overexposed, I can start kind of blending some color into there, darkening it down, but I'm not adding sort of like unnatural colors. I'm bringing color in that belongs there. And then if I want to sort of take some of this and smooth it out so that it looks less blotchy, I can do that using the mixer brush. So then if I bring back the texture information, you'll see, whoops, sorry, put that back in. You'll see that I've taken care of some of that highlight on his forehead, and I've also taken care of some of the roughness in the skin on the sides. Okay, and that was just with mixer brush for a couple of seconds, blurring out that information back and forth. Is that making sense so far to everybody? Can't see your faces, but I'm going to assume it is. All right.
So far, so good.
Okay. So very quickly, those are some of the things you can do with the low frequency or color layer. Now, one of the other things I do with it is I will use it for dodging and burning. One of the nice things about it is you're not introducing any weird colors. So like here, he has a darker part on his nose and it gets wider here. I could actually just take on that dark layer using mixer brush and kind of burn down his nose a little bit and straighten it out and just kind of take that flare that's over here and straighten it out, give him a slightly straighter nose. I would not do that for this person, but that is something you can do. You can also do that along the sides. And especially if you end up, you know, like with a little bit of harsh lighting here or something like that, you can easily start working that lighting in so that it's not as harsh. And it's easy to do. I've heard some people refer to it as being kind of fun, and it is. I mean, this stuff's kind of fun to do, okay? And so you can just kind of use this to deal with the blotchiness. You can, and what I do is, let's say I'm trying to deal with something like the shadows under his eyes. And so we have kind of light colored here, and dark here. So what I can do is I can kind of drag from the light area to the dark area, blending it in. And that'll help take care of that under his eye, right? The dark circles. These are resident doctors, so they have lots of dark circles under their eyes. That's what they do. So that is some of the things you can do with the low frequency layer. Let's do a quick run up into the high frequency layer. Now in the high frequency, one of the other things, I should have pointed this out at the beginning. Whenever you're working in frequency separation, one of the layers, you should not have sample all layers checked. You're working only in that layer. You are not sampling from below. You aren't stamping from below. Everything has to be done within the layer you're working in. Okay, because that's where the information is that you're dealing with.
Hey,
Bruce, we have a question.
Yeah.
Can you explain that again with the non-sample layers? Right, someone else, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So let me give you, I'll give you a quick example of the deal here. So when we're dealing with the low frequency layer, we're dealing with this, right? Mm-hmm. If we sampled below that, which is the layer below it that has all the information, if we went ahead and sampled all layers, I think on this, it's probably not going to be too bad because it has most of the same information. It becomes a much bigger factor when you're dealing with the high frequency layer. So in the high frequency layer, let's say I'm going to get rid of this little blemish here. We'll make it even bigger so you can see. So there's, I always tell my clients, I see their faces in ways that they never, ever, ever want to. So here we are doing current and below. So when I sample here, I'm not sampling just the layer with high frequency information. I'm sampling low frequency information. I'm sampling the background. And so when I write on it, it's very weird. Because what's happening is all that information is being laid on top of that layer, and then the math transformation is occurring. So it's basically screwing it up.
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, thanks.
Now, if I just did, instead of current and below, I said work on the current layer, then all I'm going to do, and I could probably do this without, well, you don't want to see that. So what I can do is just grab this texture here and kind of put it down here. It's a little easier to see with that. But I can just grab a little texture here and do that. And yes.
Bruce, when you are doing a headshot like this, do you approach your adjustments to color or texture first?
I always approach the adjustments to color first. So much of what we perceive, like a lot of this blotching is here. I might be able to go down to the low frequency layer, throw a lasso around it, maybe do a motion blur and get rid of, you know, like 90% of it right there, you know, just so that, because a lot of it is color, a lot of it's redness and stuff like that. So once we get rid of the redness and stuff, a lot of that looks a lot better. Now, again, he's got pretty acne covered face, and that's a different story for him. There are a lot of other clients and subjects that it would take care of that. But it's still, you know, a lot of that information could probably be dealt with here. Whoops, sorry. Look what I did. So sample all layers. If what you're doing looks horrific, it's because you have sample all layers on. So I don't know. Maybe I'd be able to get it with this. I certainly could make it better, right? And then on the high frequency layer, using the clone stamp tool, I could easily get rid of the rest of that. Just so you're not sitting here watching me do a ton of this. So if you look, well, it's probably too close to see any detail, but we're not losing texture, right? We're still seeing all of the skin texture, right? As we come across here, it's still native skin texture, and obviously you sample close to where the problem is so that you're getting texture that matches where the problem is. Does that answer that question? Okay, so let me just move down really quickly because I know that this is something that we all deal with, and I'm probably running out of time. Things like these wrinkles. If I use the mixer brush, which I will often use for this, on the low frequency side, I can get rid of slight wrinkles pretty quickly. Use the right one, yeah. Oh, that's too small. Let's make it bigger. There we go. So, you know, things that aren't too sharply changed, right? Things that don't fall into that texture realm. That didn't take very much time at all. And if you come in pretty close, texture's all still there. So then if there were areas like this that kind of were on the high frequency side, then I just come up here, make sure it's at a reasonable size, and just, and if I really want to be detailed about it, especially material that has texture like this, I might actually try and line up the lines in it. But you get the idea. And same thing, like over here, you know, it's kind of the same thing. Take some of this out of here. And if it's too much for that to deal with, not on the right layer. Yes. How did I get so small? There you go. So that's just a start of the kinds of things you could do. I was trying to think if there was anything else. One of the things I learned recently, and we'll use poor Dr. Reed here, that you can do with it is, if you remember what I said was that the low frequency layer is blurring and the high frequency layer is sharpening, you can actually use that high frequency layer to sharpen and just apply it directly without the low frequency layer. So this is that sharpening layer. And obviously you can mask it and you can reduce the opacity of it. I'm not trying to make Dr. Reed look weird. So one other thing, let me just show you how well it works on things like
Bruce,
this.
Bruce, quick question for
Yep.
you. Michael, one, I apologize, but I didn't see what tool that Bruce was using either, so we'll have to go back to the video and watch that. But the question is, for an image you intend to be black and white, would you run frequency separation before converting the image from color or after?
That's a great question. I don't have an answer for that. I generally do like all of my corrective work in color before a black and white conversion. Because if you do it on the black and white conversion, you can never have a corrected color version of that image. So
Heidi is asking for, I guess, a clarification. Mixer brush on low frequency layer, clone stamp on high frequency layer?
That's correct. Mixer brush on low frequency layer, clone stamp on high frequency layer. You can also use the patch tool on the high frequency layer. I generally do not, but it can be used. So like I could come up here on, let's see, I must have pulled that out, put that back where it belongs. So I'm on the high frequency layer, grab the patch tool, make sure that it's, well, patch tool always works on the current layer, grab some of this skin here, and maybe I want to take care of that texture there. Let's see if there's enough room here.
Michael, one, I hope that answers your question.
So yeah, so I mean, you can use patch tool. Some people do.
It does.
I don't. I generally use the clone stamp tool because I generally keep. Boy, I am all over the place today. I'm hitting every button under the sun. Because I generally am dealing with small things when I'm on that layer. One of the things I was going to show really quick is this comes up a lot. I know everybody else has that issue as well. So I'm going to just quickly generate a frequency separation layer. We're going to do 4.5 and come up here to the high frequency layer. And if I really just had this simple thing to deal with, just that hair on her forehead, then I would just use the high frequency layer and just get rid of it. Maybe sample more than once. One of the things that's nice about using the stamp tool is that you don't have that edge when you come to hairs. You know, when you use some sort of not clone stamp, whatever they're called, the magic eraser kind of thing. When you hit the end of something, a lot of times, sampling multiple layers, you'll get like a blurring at the edge. Like see right around here, you have some blurring going on. So by using clone stamp, you don't have that happen. And if you'll see that there's a little bit maybe of information here that you might want to deal with the mixer brush really quickly and just kind of make sure that there's no line left. I don't know, somewhere along here, I thought I saw a line. Maybe it's here. Yeah, I see it like kind of right in there. There's a little bit of a line left. So you just kind of blend that away and then it's gone. Okay, so since we're running out of time, let me go to the next slide here. So these are other references. Gary Hughes has a YouTube channel. He does, I think they're 3-minute or under 5-minute videos. So he has like a 3-minute frequency separation for headshots. One of the first places I saw this was at Phlearn, which is just, you know, we keep talking about Phlearn's fabulous channel. And so that's a link to their amazing power, his amazing power frequency separation, and they have their own actions. And then this is one that I started watching today called on StyleMyPic, which is an even more advanced technique using more than 2 layers of frequency separation. So I'm really excited to kind of dig into that and see what it's all about. And then lastly, there was a site I was looking at today. The link is right here, and it is using frequency separation for landscapes, using that sharpening aspect of it, and also being able to create selective blur, which is well known as the Orton effect. And so that's another site that I recommend checking out.
Is there any way we could post these links?
Yep. Well, I said when I post
That's
the
right.
video, I will have the links in the description.
Okay, thanks.
And I think that would be the
For
end.
y'all who,
Unless there's more questions.
yep, for you guys who don't know, Bruce has been nice enough to set up a YouTube channel for Maryland PPA. If you just go to YouTube and search Maryland PPA, you will find our YouTube page. Sign up, subscribe, because we post these webinars when we can to there, and you guys can watch them again and again and again. So please like and subscribe.
Hang on. Let's bring that up. So it looks like this. So if you search for Maryland PPA on YouTube, you should get this, and you get Amy and all these other great, I don't know why we have Dan Shea and Justin Bieber, but yeah, so the ones that are actually on our channel are here. So definitely subscribe. And you'll get and if you click the bell next to subscribed, you'll get notified every time we upload a new video.
That's right. And share with your friends too. All right, that's it. Bruce, anybody got any final questions for Bruce before we call in tonight?
I have one, WebRite.
Okay, Web.
I'm under the impression there are programs out there where you essentially encircle this thing and it does 80 or 90% of the work
Yes.
as a program rather than breaking it into all these pieces and moving around several times. Do you know anything about that?
Well, it could be a couple of different things that you're thinking of. One of them that I do know of is Affinity Photo, which is a Photoshop replacement, has frequency separation built into it. So instead of running an action, it's an actual feature of the tool. Why it's not already included in Photoshop, I don't know. So that's one, right? And that creates your layers for you. Another one that I've used is Portrait Professional. Whether it's actually using frequency separation or not, I'm not sure, but it does a really good job of retouching and stuff, and it's very quick. And so, and one of the things it does batches. So when I'm doing, generally when I'm doing 60 or 70 headshots like these doctors, I will run them through Portrait Professional, and it'll do most of the heavy lifting, and I spend about, I don't know, 15 seconds to 20 seconds per image.
What was the first one you mentioned?
The first one is Serif's Affinity Photo.
Ferrous, like metal?
So the company is Serif, S-E-R-I-F. It's a British company. And the product is Affinity, A-F-F-I-N-I-T-Y. And they have a full suite to replace Photoshop and Illustrator and the book one, whatever the book one is. I don't know. So they have a suite of products to replace the Photoshop suite.
You like one better than the other?
I think that, you know, Photoshop is obviously the industry standard. Affinity does some things better. There is a little bit of a learning curve because they don't lay everything out the same, but it's an amazing high quality professional product. So it's certainly comparable. You know, your mileage may vary based on, you know, how much time you spent with one or the other.
Okay.
Hey, I'm Bruce.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's another program by I just lost my train of thought.
To do what?
Luminar 4.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Luminar 4 has the AI
Yep.
technology in it for skin retouching also, and also use Imaginomics. They do skin replacement also.
Yep. Yeah, there's also whatever replaced alien skin.
Yeah,
Has a
but
different name now.
the beauty of frequency separation, just like you use your camera, you control it. So
Yes.
I mean, all these other ones do a good job, but you know.
Well, and the other thing is that for those people that aren't portrait or headshot people who are doing skin retouching, it is another tool in your toolbox to either do repairs to images or creative things. So I highly recommend looking at that video on using it for landscape, because that's an entirely different realm, and it's being used in a much different way than we would use for headshots.
All right. Any last questions for Bruce? All right. It sounds like we're good. Bruce, thank you for your time and your talents. I appreciate it.
Thank you, people. Appreciate
thank
your
you guys.
attention.
Yeah, thanks everybody for showing up tonight for our double header program. Both of these will be posted on our Maryland PPA YouTube channel, so look for that in the next couple of days. It's not going to be posted tonight. Bruce has to have time to do it, but we will post them. So thank you guys.